That morning, the sky over a small town on the outskirts of the state looked gray. Dew still clung to the leaves, while rows of shops along Main Street had just begun opening their doors. In a corner near the city park, an elderly man named Robert Miller sat quietly. He was about 75 years old. His body looked thin, his face lined with deep wrinkles, and his eyes, though weary, still held a trace of the spirit of his younger days. He wore an old olive-green military jacket, its insignia nearly faded. His pants were worn, his shoes battered. In front of him lay a small cardboard sign, written in shaky marker, "War Veteran, looking for work. God bless." Every morning, Mr. Miller came to that spot, not to beg, but simply to sit, hoping for a day's work. Sometimes he would clean a yard, sometimes help move boxes at a local store. But lately, such offers had become rare. People walked by, some glanced briefly, then quickened their pace. Others pretended to be busy with their phones. No one truly cared. Mr. Miller let out a long breath. His aged hands clutched a worn cap resting on his lap. Beneath that faded jacket was a life story of service, wounds, and memories that were not easily forgotten. Suddenly, two uniformed figures approached. Two young police officers, just stepping out of their patrol car parked by the curb. They walked briskly toward Mr. Miller. One of them spoke sharply. "Hey, sir, you can't sit here. You're disturbing the public." Mr. Miller slowly looked up. "I'm not begging, officer. Just sitting for a bit. I'm a former soldier. I have nowhere else to go," he replied quietly. But the officer seemed indifferent. He pointed to the sign in front of Mr. Miller. "That's clearly asking for charity. This isn't the place for it. Come on, get up. Move along." A few passers-by began to slow their steps, watching from a distance. But no one dared to intervene. Mr. Miller tried to stand, his knees trembling. "Please, I'm not trying to bother anyone," he said softly. Yet the officer's tone grew harsher. The atmosphere became tense. Some people started pulling out their phones, recording the scene. The morning breeze, once refreshing, now felt cold and sharp. Amid the growing crowd, light footsteps approached from across the street. A young woman, carrying a crossbody bag, her expression firm and determined. Her name was Sarah Williams. She stopped at the edge of the crowd, her eyes immediately locking onto Mr. Miller and the two officers. And that was the moment when the story truly began. Sarah stood still for a moment, her gaze steady on the two officers towering over the frail old man. The crowd around her was growing larger. Some whispered among themselves, while others kept recording the unfolding scene with their phones. Without hesitation, Sarah stepped forward, her voice calm but clear. "Excuse me, officers," she said, "but this man is not harming anyone. He is simply sitting here. There's no law against that." One of the officers, the taller of the two, turned toward her, his expression annoyed. "Ma'am, this is official police business. Please step back." But Sarah didn't move. "I'm fully aware of my rights," she replied firmly. "You are harassing an elderly veteran in public. I will not stand by and watch this happen." The second officer scoffed. "He's creating a public disturbance. We have the authority to move him." Sarah glanced down at Mr. Miller, who was now visibly shaking, his eyes filled with both fear and shame. She felt a surge of anger. A public disturbance? He's sitting quietly with a sign. That is not illegal. By now, more bystanders had gathered. The tension in the air was thick. A few voices from the crowd began to murmur in agreement with Sarah. "She's right. Leave him alone," someone whispered. "He fought for this country," another added. The officers exchanged glances, visibly irritated. The taller one radioed for backup, his voice clipped, requesting additional units. Possible obstruction of police activity. Sarah's heart pounded. She knew the situation was escalating fast. Still, she held her ground, standing protectively in front of Mr. Miller. One of the officers took a step forward, as if to move her aside, but Sarah spoke louder. "You're being recorded by dozens of people right now. Are you sure you want to do this?" The officer froze for a moment, scanning the crowd. Nearly everyone had their phones raised. The power dynamic was shifting. Amid the standoff, Sarah knelt briefly beside Mr. Miller and whispered, "Sir, do you have any family or anyone I can call?" Mr. Miller hesitated, then shakily pulled out a small, folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket. On it was a faded phone number. His voice was barely audible. "It's an old number, a friend from the service." Without wasting a second, Sarah took out her phone and dialed the number. The phone rang. Once, twice, then a deep, serious voice answered on the other end. Sarah quickly explained what was happening. The voice on the phone went silent for a beat, then responded with quiet authority. "Understood. We'll handle this." Sarah hung up, her hands slightly trembling. The officers were still glaring at her, but she remained composed. "Help is on the way," she whispered to Mr. Miller. Moments later, distant sirens could be heard, but this time they didn't belong to the local police. The crowd stirred, people turning to look down the street. Something unexpected was approaching. The distant sirens grew louder, but they sounded different from the usual police sirens. Lower, more deliberate. The crowd, already tense, turned their attention toward the end of the street. A small convoy of black SUVs came into view, moving swiftly but smoothly through traffic. Their windows were tinted, their exteriors gleaming under the dull morning light. They came to a stop near the park, not far from where Mr. Miller and Sarah stood. The two young officers exchanged uneasy glances. This wasn't the backup they had requested. A moment later, the doors of the lead SUV opened. From it stepped a tall man in a crisp military uniform, heavily decorated with medals and insignia. The crowd gasped. It was a high-ranking general. More uniformed officers emerged from the other vehicles, their demeanor calm but commanding. The atmosphere shifted instantly. What had moments ago been a scene of petty harassment was now charged with the weight of something much larger. The general strode toward a small gathering, eyes sharp, taking in everything at once. The trembling veteran, the defiant young woman, the now visibly nervous police officers, and the crowd of onlookers. He stopped a few feet from Mr. Miller and Sarah. His voice was steady, resonant. "Robert Miller?" Mr. Miller looked up slowly, disbelief washing over his face. "General Patterson," he whispered, voice cracking with emotion. The general gave a slight nod, his stern expression softening. Without hesitation, he reached forward and clasped Mr. Miller's frail shoulders. "You should have called me sooner, old friend." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Phones were raised higher. The two young police officers stood frozen, unsure of what to do. Turning sharply toward them, General Patterson's tone turned cold. "Who authorized this treatment of a decorated veteran of this nation?" Neither officer could find their voice. The general continued, "This man has given more for this country than any of you can understand. You owe him, and every citizen here, an apology." With that, he looked at the gathering crowd, and then back to Sarah. His voice softened again. "And you, young lady, thank you for standing up when others did not." Sarah, still processing what had just happened, managed a small nod. In the background, additional military personnel were quietly coordinating with local authorities, ensuring the situation was fully under control. As General Patterson turned back to Mr. Miller, the old veteran's eyes welled with tears. For the first time in years, he felt truly seen. The weight of shame and isolation began to lift. The crowd broke into soft applause, the mood shifting from tension to awe. Cameras continued to roll, capturing a moment no one had expected. But this was just the beginning of a larger change that was about to unfold. As the applause faded, General Patterson guided Mr. Miller gently to a nearby bench. Sarah followed closely, her heart still racing from the encounter. The two young officers, faces pale, stood to the side, clearly out of their depth. A senior military aide quietly approached them and whispered something. Without argument, they stepped back, no longer a part of the confrontation they had started. General Patterson sat beside Mr. Miller, speaking in a low, steady voice. "You didn't deserve this, Robert. Not after everything you've done." Sarah listened quietly, curiosity growing. What exactly had Mr. Miller done? What was his story? The general seemed to censor questions. He turned slightly toward her and began to explain. Robert Miller served in the Special Operations Unit during one of the most dangerous conflicts in recent history. He led missions that saved countless lives, both American and civilian. There are men and women alive today because of his courage. Sarah's eyes widened. She glanced at Mr. Miller, who looked down, almost embarrassed. But after returning home, the general continued. He struggled. Like many veterans, the transition to civilian life was difficult. He never asked for help, too proud, and the system failed him. Mr. Miller spoke softly, his voice trembling. I didn't want to be a burden. Others had it worse. The general's jaw tightened. You are no burden, Robert. You are a hero. The crowd, still gathered, listened in silence. The weight of the story hung in the air. Many were visibly moved, some wiping away tears. Sarah felt a lump in her throat. This man, who had been moments away from being dragged off like a criminal, was in fact one of the very people who had defended their freedoms. General Patterson stood and addressed the crowd. Let this be a lesson to us all. We must honor those who served, not turn our backs on them. And we must not tolerate injustice from anyone. He turned back to Sarah. And we must thank those with the courage to stand up as this young woman did today. The crowd broke into louder applause this time, genuine and heartfelt. Sarah blushed but held her ground, feeling a new sense of resolve. Meanwhile, military personnel had discreetly arranged transportation for Mr. Miller. A medical team was also on standby to ensure his health would be properly assessed. But the story was far from over. What had just happened was about to spark a chain of events that would reach far beyond this small town. By late afternoon, the small park where the incident had taken place had nearly emptied. Only a few remained, quietly discussing what they had witnessed. But the internet was already buzzing. Multiple videos of the confrontation had gone viral within hours. Clips showing Sarah standing between the police officers and Mr. Miller had been shared across social media platforms. The arrival of the military convoy and General Patterson had stunned viewers everywhere. News outlets picked up the story quickly. Headlines began to appear. Local woman stands up for veteran harassed by police. Decorated war hero rescued by fellow officers after public incident. Community calls for better treatment of veterans. Sarah's phone didn't stop ringing. Journalists wanted interviews. Friends and strangers sent her messages of support and gratitude. At the same time, Mr. Miller had been quietly transported to a secure military medical facility. There, doctors gave him a full checkup. He was underweight, dehydrated, and had untreated injuries from years past. But he was safe now, in the hands of people who cared. General Patterson personally oversaw Mr. Miller's admission, ensuring he would receive the best possible care. We owe you that much and more, the general had said before leaving the hospital. Meanwhile, local officials scrambled to control the fallout. The police department issued a public statement, promising an internal review of the incident. The 2 young officers involved were placed on administrative leave pending investigation. The mayor of the town, seeing the story spiral beyond local control, reached out to General Patterson. Together, they planned to hold a public event to honor Mr. Miller and to address the larger issue of how veterans were treated. Sarah, still trying to process everything, sat in her small apartment that evening. The weight of the day was catching up with her. She stared at her phone, dozens of unread messages lighting up the screen. Yet one message stood out, a simple text from an unknown number. Thank you for what you did today. You reminded us all of what courage looks like. GP. It was from General Patterson. Sarah smiled softly. For the first time that day, she allowed herself to breathe. Little did she know, her actions had sparked a conversation far beyond her town. One that was about to bring even greater change. A few days later, under a crisp blue sky, the town's central square was filled with people. Rows of chairs had been set up in front of the town hall. Flags fluttered in the breeze. News cameras were stationed all around, their lenses trained on the makeshift stage at the front. The event had been organized swiftly but thoroughly. It wasn't just a local affair anymore. Veterans groups from across the state had arrived. Military personnel in full dress uniform were present. Civic leaders and members of the public came in large numbers. At the center of it all sat Mr. Miller. He was no longer wearing his faded jacket. Today, he wore a freshly pressed military blazer, adorned with medals that shone in the sunlight. Though still thin and frail, his posture was prouder. His eyes were clearer. Beside him sat Sarah, invited as an honored guest. She wore a simple dress, her expression modest but composed. General Patterson stood at the podium, his voice resonant as he addressed the crowd. "We are here today not only to honor a hero of this nation," he began, "but also to remind ourselves of the values we claim to uphold: courage, compassion, justice." He paused, then looked toward Sarah. Sometimes it takes a single voice, a single act of bravery, to awaken a community. Miss Sarah Williams, by standing up for Mr. Miller, you reminded us all of our responsibility to each other. The crowd erupted in applause. Sarah felt her cheeks flush but nodded respectfully. General Patterson continued, "And to Robert Miller, your service will never be forgotten again. From this day forward, you will have the support and care you have always deserved." Another wave of applause followed. Mr. Miller's eyes shimmered with emotion. He struggled to his feet, and with the general's help, addressed the crowd. "I fought for this country because I believed in what it stood for," he said, voice steady. "And today, thanks to all of you, I believe in it again." The crowd rose to their feet, a standing ovation rolling across the square. The sound of applause echoed off the surrounding buildings. As the ceremony concluded, Mr. Miller was formally presented with a special commendation and guaranteed lifelong support from the military veteran services. His story had become a catalyst for renewed focus on veterans' welfare across the region. Sarah, meanwhile, found herself approached by countless people, veterans, community leaders, ordinary citizens. All wanted to thank her, to shake her hand, to express their admiration. Yet amid all the attention, Sarah remained grounded. She had not acted for recognition. She had simply done what she believed was right. But even she did not realize how far the ripples of that one moment of courage would soon spread. In the weeks that followed the ceremony, life began to change for Mr. Miller in ways he never could have imagined. With the help of General Patterson and a network of veterans organizations, Mr. Miller was moved into a comfortable apartment within a well-maintained veterans housing community. The place was quiet, safe, and filled with others who shared similar stories of service and sacrifice. He now had regular medical care, meals, and counseling services. Slowly, his health began to improve. The hollow look in his eyes started to fade. He even gained a little weight and color in his cheeks. Most importantly, he was no longer alone. Sarah visited often. They would sit together in the community garden, sipping tea while Mr. Miller shared stories from his days in the service. Sometimes he would laugh. Sometimes he would grow quiet. Sarah always listened patiently. For the first time in years, Mr. Miller began to feel a sense of hope. "I never thought I'd see this day," he told Sarah during one visit. She smiled gently. "You deserve it," she replied. Word of the incident continued to spread. The video clips were now being used in training programs for police officers across the state, teaching them about proper respect and sensitivity when dealing with veterans and vulnerable individuals. Meanwhile, local leaders pushed for new policies to better support veterans in the community. Shelters expanded their programs. Job placement services were improved. Awareness campaigns were launched in schools to teach younger generations about honoring those who had served. Sarah found herself speaking at several of these events. Though public speaking wasn't something she had ever sought out, she knew it was important. "If one act of kindness can lead to this much change," she told a group of students, "imagine what we can do if we all choose to stand up for what's right." Mr. Miller, too, began to take part in these efforts. Though his steps were still slow, his voice was strong. He spoke to younger veterans, offering support and encouragement. He reminded them they were not forgotten. Through it all, the friendship between Sarah and Mr. Miller grew. What had started as a chance encounter on a gray morning had blossomed into a bond that neither had expected but both cherished. But beyond personal friendship, something larger had been set in motion, a movement of awareness, compassion, and action that would continue to grow. And in a small town that once looked the other way, people were now watching, listening, and caring in ways they never had before. As the months passed, the story of Sarah and Mr. Miller began to reach far beyond their small town. National news programs picked up the story, airing interviews with both of them. Clips of Sarah standing her ground and the arrival of General Patterson were shown across the country. It sparked a wider conversation about how veterans were treated and the importance of ordinary citizens speaking out against injustice. Veterans organizations from across the nation invited Mr. Miller to speak at events. Though initially shy, he found strength in his voice. His words resonated deeply with audiences, especially younger veterans who often felt invisible in civilian life. Sarah, too, was invited to conferences and panels. She spoke not only about standing up for veterans, but about the broader need for empathy and courage in everyday life. One day, an unexpected invitation arrived. Both Sarah and Mr. Miller were asked to attend a special ceremony at the state capitol. It was to be an event honoring citizens who had made significant contributions to the community. On the day of the ceremony, Sarah and Mr. Miller stood side by side on the grand steps of the Capitol building, facing a large crowd. State officials, military leaders, and fellow citizens filled the space. When their names were called, the applause was thunderous. Standing at the podium, Sarah spoke first. "I never thought a simple act of standing up would lead to something like this," she began. "But it wasn't just about me. It was about doing what any of us should do when we see someone being treated unfairly." She turned toward Mr. Miller, "And it was about honoring those who have given so much for us." Mr. Miller, voice steady, followed. "I wore a uniform many years ago, thinking my fight was over when I came home. But sometimes battles continue long after the war ends. Thanks to Sarah, and thanks to all of you, I know now that we are not forgotten." The crowd rose to their feet once more. After the ceremony, as they stood outside in the crisp air, Mr. Miller turned to Sarah, eyes bright with gratitude. "You changed my life," he said simply. Sarah shook her head gently. "No," she replied. "You changed mine." Neither of them had set out to become symbols or heroes, but together they had sparked a change, one that was now rippling through communities far beyond their own. And still more was yet to come. As the year unfolded, the story of Sarah and Mr. Miller continued to inspire people in ways neither of them could have imagined. Veteran support groups across the country reported an increase in volunteers. Donations poured into programs aimed at housing, healthcare, and job placement for veterans. Legislators began drafting new bills to improve the services and protections for those who had served. One such bill, introduced at the state level, was directly inspired by the events that had unfolded in Sarah's town. It proposed mandatory sensitivity and respect training for all law enforcement officers regarding interactions with veterans and vulnerable citizens. Sarah and Mr. Miller were invited to speak at the legislative hearings. Sitting side by side, they shared their experiences with lawmakers, many of whom were visibly moved. "We can't change the past," Sarah told them, "but we can shape the future." The bill passed with overwhelming support. Meanwhile, in their town, the changes were even more tangible. The local police department underwent significant reforms. The chief of police personally invited Sarah and several veterans to assist in revising training protocols. Officers were now required to attend community outreach events and engage directly with veterans organizations. In schools, new programs were introduced to educate students about the sacrifices veterans had made and the challenges they faced when returning home. Sarah, who had returned to her teaching job, took an active role in developing these lessons. One crisp autumn afternoon, Sarah and Mr. Miller visited the park where everything had begun. It was a different place now. A new bench had been installed beneath a large oak tree. A small plaque on it read, "In honor of those who serve and those who stand for justice." As they sat there, watching families stroll through the park, Mr. Miller smiled softly. "Funny how one morning can change so much," he mused. Sarah nodded. "It wasn't just one morning," she said. "It was every choice that came after." They sat in companionable silence for a while, the warmth of friendship and purpose surrounding them. Neither sought fame or accolades. What mattered most was knowing that their actions had helped others, and that the town, once indifferent, now remembered and honored its heroes. And for Mr. Miller, who once sat invisible on that very sidewalk. Life had begun anew. Winter came quietly to the small town. Snow dusted the rooftops, and twinkling lights lined the streets in preparation for the holidays. In the community center, a special event was being held, a gathering of veterans, their families, and local residents. It was a warm, simple celebration of unity and gratitude. Mr. Miller was there, healthier and stronger than he had been in years. His steps were steadier, his eyes brighter. He greeted fellow veterans with firm handshakes and shared laughter that had been missing from his life for far too long. Sarah moved through the crowd with ease, now a familiar face in the community. Though still modest about her role in everything that had happened, people greeted her with genuine affection and respect. Later in the evening, as the gathering settled, General Patterson took the stage to say a few words. "We've seen how one moment can spark change," he began. "But let us remember, it was not a moment of force or anger. It was a moment of compassion. One person chose to stand up when it would have been easier to walk away." He looked towards Sarah, who sat near Mr. Miller, and in doing so, reminded us all of something too easily forgotten, that dignity is not given by a uniform or a medal, but is owed to every human being. The room was silent, the message sinking in deeply. Afterward, Sarah and Mr. Miller stepped out into the crisp night air. Snowflakes drifted down around them. Mr. Miller looked out at the quiet street, remembering how different it felt that day months ago, when it sat alone, invisible to the world. "You know," he said softly, "I used to think no one would ever see me again, that maybe I didn't matter anymore." Sarah's voice was gentle. "You do matter. You always did." He gave a small nod, emotion tightening his throat. "And so do you," he added, his voice steady. "You reminded us all." They stood for a moment beneath the falling snow, two lives forever intertwined by a single act of courage and kindness. And as they walked together down the quiet street, a new understanding lingered in the air, that no matter how small one's actions may seem, they can echo far beyond what anyone expects.